Aloha and welcome to this second screencast on Bowfolios. In this screencast, we're going to briefly overview the application structure. And I want to quickly note that the application structure of Bowfolios is based upon the application structure for Meteor Application Template React. So I highly recommend that if you haven't, go through all the videos on this, understand this first, because this is a simpler system. And then as I go through Bowfolios, you'll understand what's similar, what's different. Bowfolios is basically a somewhat more complicated version of Meteor Application Template React. It's more complicated in that we have more kinds of collections and they interact in more interesting kinds of ways. Okay, please check out this one first, and then you'll be ready to look at this one. All right, so let's dive right in. To start, here's the top level application structure. There's a Github directory. The interesting thing in here is basically that we have this GitHub action, which is used to build and test the system every time you commit to the main branch. That's cool. We'll get into that later. There's a .idea directory, which is created by my editor, IntelliJ IDEA. That's get ignored, so you don't see that when you download the system. But if you're using our editor, you'll get one. There's the app directory containing the source code. There's a config directory containing the Meteor settings file that's used to load the default data. Doc directories contain some documentation. We're going to ignore that. Git ignore, we'll ignore that, and so forth. Nothing else here that's that interesting to understand the actual application. All right, so let's go into the app directory. And what you'll see here is we have a .deploy directory, which is a standard thing we use, and you'll see that later on when we talk about deployment. We can use this directory to use Meteor up to actually deploy this to DigitalOcean. We have a .meteor directory. The most interesting thing here is that we have commented out the insecure package. That we use insecure package in Meteor Application Template React because we're simplifying our code by updating when we have a form submission or whatever. We update the local mini Mongo database on the client, and because we have insecure enabled, updating the local database will then update the server, and then that will be propagated out to all the other clients. So it's a simpler way for simple situations of doing database manipulation. In Bowfolios, which is more realistic, what happens is when someone fills out a form and performs some update, we're going to need to update multiple collections at once, okay, in order to fulfill that kind of request to update the state of the system. And it turns out once you're updating multiple collections at once, then the method of trying to update the mini Mongo and have it replicate actually turns out to be more complicated than the best practice in Meteor, which is to not have the insecure package and to use this thing called Meteor methods instead. So in Bowfolios, we're going to use Meteor methods and get rid of insecure, not really particularly because we're concerned about security, although it's a good thing, but mostly because it's in fact simpler. When you have a bunch of different collections that you have to manipulate once, it's much simpler to write a Meteor method to do it. Okay, so we'll get to that, but that's what's going on there. Then we have a client and a server top level directory. This is the code that that is run each time you have a client or browser connect. The server contains the code that's run each time the server comes up. We have a public directory containing assets that we can display. Private directory, we'll get to that in a minute. And then we have the imports directory, which has the most of the code, really the 90% of the code in the system. All right, so that I think is kind of the top level structure. What I wanted to do next is kind of just go through the control flow a little bit, not delving into the details, but at least so you kind of understand how things roll. So let's start with server. Remember, when the server comes up, it looks for a directory called server, it executes the code in that file. We have a single code in there, and we're saying when the server starts up, there's only three things we need to do: load the publications file, the Mongo file, and the methods file. So let's look at each of these in turn. in import startup server publications. Remember that Meteor has a pub/sub model, and so we're defining our publications, very similar to Meteor Application Template React, but we've got more collections, so we have more publications to to define here. We also have a Mongo.js, and this is pretty similar to the Meteor Application Template React. We've got this create user, we've got to add interest, got to add profile. So, because we have more kinds of collections, when we're initializing the database, we have to have more functions, right, than we did in Meteor Application Template React. But it's all, quite straightforward, and I'm not going to go over it right now in the sake of, so I can get through the whole system in a convenient amount of time. But we have this similar kind of thing that that we check to see if the database is empty, and then we go ahead and we use the settings file to load a bunch of data. Okay, then at the bottom, here's something I want to tell you, focus on, because this is kind of an important thing. There is a limit on the size of the settings file, okay, for arcane reasons, which I won't go into. But what that means, however, is that students find when they want to initialize their system with default data, and they have enough of the default data, several hundred objects or 1,000 objects or something, they scrape something. What happens is the system blows up, and the error is that, hey, you can't have a settings file that's this big. Okay, so that's a problem. It's nice to put your data in the settings file, except when you have a lot of data that you want to initialize your system with, and it won't work. Okay, so there's another way to do it, which enables you to load as much data as you want. Okay, and that's to use this thing called an assets file. And so what you'll see here is that we've created this flag in our settings file saying load assets file. Okay, and we want to check that we haven't already loaded this data. So that's what this second flag is, because what we're going to end up doing is just adding a couple more users. And if this flag is true, then this code is executed. And this is the standard way, and it's super simple, okay? So basically, you have a name of an assets file, and it's going to be stored in a directory called private. And Meteor says any directory called private is private to the server side, so the client can't see it. It's not published in the bundle that goes over to the clients. So you can put stuff in here that you don't want users to see. And so the assets file is called data.json, and that you just have to specify the file name, plunk it in the private directory, and Meteor will find it. And then basically you can call assets.getText to get that file as a string. You can call json.parse to convert it into JSON. So this file looks like this, and then do whatever you want to load it. In this case, we do this. Okay, so very, very simple, and gets around a common problem if you exceed 64,000 characters in your settings.development JSON file. All right, that's that. Let's go back here. Then we have methods, right? And that's in the both, because both the client and server side need to know about methods. And this is the way that we're going to update. As you can see here, we have the profiles collection, the profiles interest collection, we have the profiles project collection. We have 3 collections that need to be updated in order to update a single profile. And that turns out to be complicated if you're trying to do it on the client side using the insecure thing, which you don't really want to do anyway. So this, once you learn a little bit about Meteor methods, it's very straightforward. It's basically a remote procedure call where the client can say, I want to invoke this method, and that code will run on the server side. And of course, the server wants to do a little bit of checking to make sure that that client is authorized to actually run that method, and there's ways to do that. But at any rate, once you're on the server side, then you can do these updates, and it's very simple and straightforward. All right, so that's how we bring up the server. Let's look at the client. The client has a main.js. it's going to, so this is when a browser connects. We're going to go to startup client startup.jsx, and we're going to go through the same things we do with Meteor Application Template React of attaching the app object to the root, and the root thing is defined here. And of course we have a style.css, and this is where we can put, with Bootstrap, we got those CSS variables, we got all sorts of groovy things we can do. And you plunk all this stuff into a style.css in the client side, and you're off to the races. Okay, that's how you start up that client, the server. We have the data model in the API directory. So you can see we got an interest collection we define here. We got some tests for the interest collection here. For profiles, we have the profiles collection, which we define here. And then in addition, we have two other collections, profiles interests and profiles projects. And I call these join collections. Okay, and we'll see how those work when we go into the data model in a little more detail. The idea here is that this collection is used to maintain a many-to-many mapping between profiles and projects. So a given profile can be associated with many projects, and a given project can be associated with many profiles, many-to-many. All right, so how, what's the simplest way to actually represent that idea? And the simplest way to do it is to create a collection that has basically two fields, one containing a profile and one containing a project. And so if there's a document that has, profile A and project B, then we know that those two things are associated together. And so if you want to know all the projects associated with a profile, you can do a find for all the profiles with a given string, and then you'll get a list or array of documents back containing all the projects associated with that. And then we can do the reverse. We can search for a given project, and we'll get back all the documents where the project field was that project and the profile that was associated with it. So this is the way we can do many-to-many mappings really simply. But it means when we want to update a profile or project, we got to update this collection to make sure that it's correct. So that's that one, and we got the exact same thing going on for profiles and interests, because that's again another many-to-many mapping. Go in the projects directory, and we see we've got some projects and project interests. So we've got this third. There's three things, so there's basically three interconnections, and this is the third one. Cool. So that's the API directory. Finally, user interface directory. We've got the same basic, idea, layouts, top level, which has, provides the standard structure of a page, usually with a nav bar at the top and a footer at the bottom, and then pages. So in this case, we just have a single layout. Let's go in there now. And this is the app. This was the thing that was loaded in our startup. And so you can see we have a nav bar always at the top, we have a footer always at the bottom, and then in between we provide a page, and these are all the different pages, and this looks just very similar to Meteor Application Template React, so I'm not going to go into it any further. You can go back to Meteor Application Template React to hear me talk more about that. Set of pages are here, and then we also have a couple of utilities functions which I'll go to later, that are kind of outside our standard model of components, layouts, and pages. Here's components just so you can see. And so we put them in a separate place. I think that is all. We've seen everything, at least at a very high level. Okay, so that's the application structure of Bowfolios. I'll see you in the next video.